Welcome to The Call to Rise, the podcast for sacred rebels, visionaries, and conscious changemakers. Here we sit down with the people birthing the new earth, weaving ancient wisdom with modern strategy to build movements that heal, transform, and uplift our world. I'm Mackenzie Darling, your host, inviting you into honest conversations, practical tools, and hard-won wisdom to awaken your power and to inspire you to answer the call to rise and to meet this moment in history. Today, I am so excited to welcome Bob Otis Stanley, who holds degrees in psychology and religious studies with postgraduate sociology and cognitive studies and a master's in divinity from the University of Chicago. He is the senior pastor and chief garden steward, which is the equivalent of being a board chair, for Sacred Garden Community Church. He was also a founding chairperson for Decriminalize Nature in Oakland, a co-founder of Sacred Plant Alliance, and a founding chairperson for Alma's Facilitation Training Institute. He has been an invited presenter and advisor for Oregon, California, and Colorado decriminalization, legalization policy initiatives. You have been very, very busy, Bob.
I'm one of this new era that's chose not to have children. So, that kind of freed up a lot of space for other kinds of work, I guess, maybe. That's my excuse for today.
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting topic to dive into because it seems like a lot of movement makers actually don't have children a lot of the times and that their child is their movement.
Yeah, I feel that. And, it's interesting. I was just talking with a loving mother and a loving father recently about kind of what we learned from having children, right? Mm-hmm. Which I think can be great. And that's one of the challenges, I think, for childless movement makers to sort of learn that boundary setting and that sort of holding a calm, loving center, the things that having a child can sort of make you learn sometimes, right? Anyway, I think that's both a strength and also recognizing additional learnings that are missed, right, by not having my own, that kind of family. So we have to learn however we can, and here we are.
Yeah, and here we are. I'd love to jump into some of the most sacred learnings that you've learned from stewarding Sacred Garden Community Church and just community in general.
Oh my gosh, that's such a big question.
It's a big question, yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I was just chatting with someone about learning yesterday, and Sacred Garden Community Church, which is, you had mentioned earlier in the bio, which is my sort of main love child.
Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
It's relating. Yeah, it's okay. Relating. This is thanks for kind of opening that space for me. It's we share what we call least dogma within Sacred Garden Community Church. It's simply that we're open to the possibility of direct experience of the divine, even within this lifetime, right? And that's through the sacraments of our church. But that's it. That's as complicated as our dogma gets, that we can have this experience with the sacraments. So this opens up a learning space because we're not asserting that we already know everything, right? We're just kind of saying, hey, we believe we can have this experience. That's really all we're saying we know. And so this opens up a space for us to learn from each other, right? Mm-hmm. But that space of learning is often, it's less grounded. It's more unsettling in some ways than a space of knowing.
Isn't that the truth? Yes.
Right. And so there's something about a space of knowing that can be so calm and so easy and sort of settled almost by definition, whereas a space of learning is what that is. And so one of the things that we were asking together was, may our learning, so Sacred Garden is a place of continual learning because we're sharing least dogma. So we're opening that space. How can we learn from each other, right? It's like you have a perspective, I have a perspective. We're not trying to convince each other we're right or wrong, but we can now communicate, right, in this less subordinated environment. So it's a learning space. And now I'm getting into some of the learnings, which are simply bringing together widely diverse cultures and diverse perspectives in a place of least dogma, where there's not some wise shaman or taita or onanya who's claiming to have the sort of metaphysical truth that I will share with you, right? Rather, the metaphysical truth here is that we're claiming to know the least in a way, and we're seeking experience and learning together, that can be challenging.
I think it is the challenge of our time.
Yeah, good. I'm glad we're getting there. I know I was kind of trying to pull strings together to get to that point, but that place of experiencing otherness, something that we don't understand, even maybe something that we might, like my belief systems may disagree, right? Like I grew up out of this sort of Western scientific tradition. I love Western science. That's one of my dogmas. I recognize that as a dogma. It has its limits, but it has strong magic. And when I meet someone who has a less scientific perspective, maybe some worldview that I think doesn't really meet my scientific ideology, some kind of an astrological thing or something like this, I'm tempted to be like, right? But within the community, we're asking to be open, like, okay, I trust you. I respect you. I know you're trying to bring me, I believe you're trying to bring real meaning into our relationship. How can I let go of my hard edges, and be soft and listen and try to learn from that difference that I just think is all wrong. Right? That's work, and that's a learning. And so one of my learnings has been, and this isn't so easy, and this actually, in a way, I kind of learned it from experience, but also from this wonderful woman named Hanifa Washington, who's just a really, I think, sharp person. She was like, Bob, are you trying to do Skittles? And I was like, what do you mean? She's like, you're just putting all the colors and all the flavors together in a bag and kind of shaking it up and imagining that that's just going to taste good. I was like, well, I think I am, after I thought about it a little bit. And she was like, that's going to be really hard. And so that's one of my learnings I'm really working to grow patience, sort of a grace, to not be upset when things aren't really understood or when maybe I'm not understood. Try to have a lot of compassion, because in that space of less dogma, a lot of fear can emerge, right?
Sure.
And so those are some pretty deep learnings. That's just a couple. There's a start, just a start. Yeah.
Absolutely, just a start. It's interesting because you are the founder of a psychedelic church, which already that holds so much gravitas. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think your main movement is actually this least dogma. It's something that I continuously hear you always lead with, and it's something that feels the most close to your heart. And it feels like the psychedelics and the way of experiencing the divine are ways of experiencing this least dogma to actually open up your consciousness to higher perspectives and higher truths, and to reconnect us with our interconnectedness. Yeah.
Thanks for bringing that up. And you and I have known each other for a little bit, so I really appreciate you kind of pulling these things out. And I'm kind of feeling two strong threads in there. One is the thread of least dogma, and what does that mean? And the other one is this thread of, and you used a few different words, which I loved. We could say consciousness, we could say direct experience. I might even say the divine or divinity. Truth, you use the word truth, right? So those are two areas that I have been fascinated kind of since I had consciousness, right? And I hope that they're complementary. I hope that these interests are really feeding each other. So that sort of amplifying, that consciousness amplifying, that direct experience amplifying aspect of entheogens. It's like I call it a sacrament, particularly within an intentional practice, becomes a sacrament for me. That opens up a space where we can communicate sort of aside from dogma or beyond or within, around dogma, right? It's like, okay, I say God, you say non-dual experience of reality, or I may say non-dual experience. We have these different words we use, but what's your experience and what's my experience? Right. And we'll keep using words. There are other ways. I mean, we can also be present and ring bells and all those things that we like to do, but we're trying to communicate and understand what's happening inside that other body over there. So we're using these words around direct experience. So I love the entheogens, the psychedelics, because they open space for us to talk beyond words in a way, right? Or deeper than words. And for me, that's also where I'll experience the divine. So some may, or where I'm experiencing what I might call pure consciousness or conscious. This is my experience with entheogens. Consciousness is actually in everything. Well, maybe, but that's what it feels like sometimes during the journey, right? So that opens space for that rich conversation then around dogma. And my dear mother, who comes to our church services, my dad would, but he's lost his hearing now and being 87 years old. she's like, Bob, I always knew you loved psychedelics. That was obvious, pretty early on. I think I talked to my dad about it, but my mom found my mushroom kit, so one way or the other, she's like, we all knew you loved psychedelics, but what may not be so obvious is how much you really love truth, right? And when I was growing up in East Tennessee, it was kind of hard for me because there was a lot of assumed truth in that community. And I don't know if I was blessed or cursed, but I was like one of the family that was the sort of growing up in East Tennessee, far left woke identified kind of, right? And so I was always like, there are other ways of thinking. Why are we beaming missionaries down into South America? Maybe they have some knowledge for us, right? Mm-hmm. People in the Far East have a completely different way of looking at the world. They don't say Jesus every other sentence like people do here in Tennessee, mm-hmm. right? And I'm like, they're wise too, I think. And so I was really struggling growing up in East Tennessee with this swimming in a water that was like colored purple and just assumed it was clear, right? And it would frustrate me and my poor family. Barely a dinner would go by that I wouldn't, sort of say, how can we believe all this stuff? And, what if we were somewhere else, we'd think different. So early on, I got this sort of resistance, to being dominated by ideology.
I want to pause for a quick moment. If what we're talking about today resonates with you, you'll want to check out the Movement Maker Incubator, my 6-month intensive where I guide sacred rebels and changemakers to birth their own movements using ancient wisdom and modern strategy. You can join the waitlist and learn more about this sacred rite of passage for changemakers at globalmovementmaker.com/incubator. There's something that I have seen as a pattern with movement makers is an early obsession, right? Something that calls you over and over and over again, that you keep wanting to come to, the dinner table and really have these deep, in-depth conversations. And oftentimes people not being able to actually meet you there in that depth. And it can feel isolating at times. I mean, I have to say that I've met your mother and she's one of my favorite people on this planet and seems incredibly supportive and amazing. And I've heard stories of your father and how incredible he was when you came to him with your psychedelic experiences. It sounds like you were pretty lucky in that sense that you had a family that was open to this obsession of trying to find truth.
Yeah. And, this is a really subtle part here because people talk about nepotism and we talk about psychedelics as non-specific amplifiers. And within some religious frameworks, there are these ideas that what you're seeking is what you will find, right? And so it's like, what comes first? I have so much admiration. I've been making a new friend, someone who lives kind of nearby, and they grew up in a really difficult environment, with the parents were not supportive, sort of almost maybe kind of mentally ill relationship with the children. And this person has come into such depth and such wisdom and such peace, And so I just want to say how much admiration I have identifying as a wounded healer. Right. And then we're talking and I'm like, well, can there be a privileged healer? Is it possible? Right. And I feel privileged and I feel deeply privileged by the Quaker ancestry of my family and the sincere religious and truth-seeking nature of my family, all the doctors and preachers that are my aunts and uncles, and nurses and like that. I'm just thankful for that, right? Whether it's running in the genes or in the family culture or all of the above, I don't know. But there is a fascination with concepts of truth or God or rightness or goodness. All of that is running in the family, right? So that was there even before, sort of from birth. And I'm also so thankful, and you kind of mentioned that my family was truth-seeking enough that I could take that third of 4 children I'm going to take the other perspective kind of within the family and say, all right, I understand there's a big truth tradition here, but it's not getting me. It's not working for me. And that the family could hear that, right, and allow that. Mm-hmm. But then this is also where entheogens for me have made a big difference because I know I was already truth-seeking when I was 17, and I had that big LSD experience on the side of the Smoky Mountains in Tennessee, and I don't think I would have experienced, I'm just using words, I'll say God, divinity, truth, non-dual experience of consciousness, whatever that experience can be that entheogens can open up for us, that I think you don't have to have entheogens. For me, I don't believe I would in this lifetime have met God without the help of that sacrament. right? My grandma was like me. She felt a similar ideology, but she wasn't able to access psychedelics before she passed. And I remember talking to her, and I was so frustrated because, we were close, but the timing just didn't work for me to get her all the way around to Journey, right? And she was like, Bob, I never really felt that I experienced God, which is kind of breaking my heart right now. You know what I mean? She's like, I don't really know, but I'm resigned. I'm okay. I'm going to go ahead and see what happens. But I just, had such a strong wish, because I think that sacrament could have opened up the way for her. Right. And so that's just to say, I don't know what's coming first, the chicken or the egg, and how far back does that go to cause a movement maker, like, I think that's coming out of before me.
Ooh, I just got full body goosebumps. Yeah, I could really feel your truth and your heart and your connection to your grandmother and your ancestry. I know in my own journey under Movement Maker and the incubator that I have is really the whole program is the bedrock of ancestral healing and wisdom. I often say that it's bloodline to blueprint. Your ancestral stories are living in the very DNA of your existence. And so Daniel Floor, who is one of the biggest thought leaders within ancestral healing and wisdom, often quotes saying, you may not be having a relationship with your ancestors, but your ancestors are having a relationship with you. And I just love that quote. And I know within my own healing work that my movement is really the reparation and the offering to my ancestors. And so I'd love to unpack that a little bit more. Like, do you know a lot about your ancestry and maybe a reason why it brought you to the threshold of being one of the biggest thought leaders in the psychedelic renaissance? Well,
that's such a sweet question. And it's also poignant for me because some of us, everything keeps changing over time. We're just in the time we are now, And so I'm not reifying or sort of hardening into this time. But in this time, some of us have had more or less access to knowledge of who our ancestors are and how they've been. And I'm just going to express so much sorrow and hope for retrieval for folks whose lineages have been cut in different ways, often by violence. And that when that history is pulled out from under our feet, I think it's pulling who we are in many ways out from under our feet. And that can lead to a lot of longer term challenges. And I think we're experiencing those in the United States, just having tried to push down other ancestries and, like that. And I think there are reasons, and I don't think that this is the only time that's ever happened, but it's a tragedy when we lose connection to who we are through our past. Right. Yeah. I don't think it happens.
Well, and also, Bob, I'll say just really quickly to your point around least dogmas, a reason why those ancestries have been so pushed down is because of the homogenization of trying to make everyone the same. And so with your least dogma to the truth of recognizing people's differences, it's actually directly tied into our ancestral stories.
Amen. Amen. Ayaya. Aho. Ashe. Yeah. And even two Christians in East Tennessee actually are incredibly different one from the other if you really start getting to know each other, right?
Of course, yeah.
And the relationship of power to dogma and belief and control and experience is another one of those learnings that I wasn't even going to be able to get, that we're going to have to take 6 hours of courses to talk about all this. So anyway, just talking about ancestry, I want to just express that recognition right now and the honoring and the gratitude for those who are doing that deep healing work, retrieving their ancestral pride, and for those of us who are working to end epistemicide, the sort of trying to kill other beliefs because they're different from ours, right? May we move into a space of less shared dogma to where we can glory in our difference together. Yeah. And really learn from each other, right? That's what we're talking about. But yes, on that specific ancestry side, I love the question because it's so interesting. There are different ways we can talk about it. I mentioned my sort of Western scientific background. I also love early Buddhism. And of course, having had my background, I've learned a lot from Christianity and, but I have this, there are different ways we can think about ancestors. One thing for sure, I've got the genetics of our earth in me, I believe. You and I are related.
Yeah.
We're in the same family. Also, I believe I'm in the same family as the cattle who are in the farms and the little spider that I might have killed that time and maybe brought outside the next time. You know what I mean? And so who are our ancestors and how do we relate to our ancestors, right? There are a lot of different ways, different languages that we have about that. One of the big ways I relate to my ancestors probably is through my body, right? And its feelings that I inherited. Yeah. And then we have our cultures that we live in. And boy, you better believe that's our ancestors speaking.
Well, our ancestors created that.
That's right. This language, like these words, we're also making them up. We're the ancestors of the future, right? And so we're doing it right now.
I wish more people started waking up to, and this is a big reason why I have created the Call to Rise and Movement Maker, is to wake up to the fact that we are the future ancestors. And so what world are we building and putting into place for future generations? Yeah.
And so just to sort of recognize from my eyes, there are many different lineages, backgrounds, perspectives, worldviews, dogmas that we can look at. All of them in one way or another will probably need to attend to the existence of ancestors and the fact of our parentage, because those are something that we seem to share across beliefs, right? And so that is a rich area to be working. Yeah. And I think now, this is a tough one. We humans want change. We want positive transformation. It seems often many of us do. And we want things to be better. As a 15-year-old in East Tennessee, you better believe I wanted things to be better. As far as I was concerned, everything was wrong.
Yeah.
Right? And my poor parents, who, again, I admit, my ancestors had been Quakers during the Civil War. But as far as I was concerned, slavery was their effing fault. Right. And so one of the aspects that I'm talking about ancestral healing is, how can we learn to appreciate all of the hard work that even our flawed ancestors and all the love, and this is hard, this is to me provocative, but we're here, we made it here. And I think even if we're just humans alive today on this planet, most of us, by virtue of being humans, are massively privileged. Even a relatively poor human, we can fly around, we can ride bicycles, we can, there are all these. And those are fruits of modernity, those two things I just mentioned. In the psychedelic space, there's been a lot of conversation around the negative aspects of modernity. Think about ancestors, right? And so I think those negative aspects, the critique, right, is incredibly important because we want things to be better, but also and this is something that I'm talking about work that I've had to do over the years. When I was between age 6 or 11 and 35, I could not really find a space in my heart to have respect for eldership because of the depredations, because of the denigration of humans that I could see under leadership, right? Like it's happening from my eyes in the United States today. There are people with other perspectives about the leadership in the United States who feel that there's eldership there, and I wish that they're correct. But so a big part of my work has been healing work with ancestry, has been to find the place where I can retrieve respect.
Every episode of the Call to Rise podcast is about the changemakers and movements reshaping our world. But the podcast is just the beginning. On my Substack, I open the door wider, sharing my personal journey with movement makers, the wins, the struggles, and the behind-the-scenes rituals that help leaders birth what's next. If you're ready to go deeper into the frameworks and practices you hear me hint at here, join me at globalmovementmaker.substack.com. That's so rich, Bob. It's so rich. I'm reminded of Francis Weller's work around grief in his book, The Wild Edge of Sorrow. And he talks about how he keeps 2 different rocks on his altar to represent both the hardships and the gifts and the wisdom and the glory of his ancestry. And both are true. Both we need to hold, but it takes a lot of complexity, a lot of emotional maturity to be able to step into that and be able to hold both.
I'm starting to feel a little theme in this podcast right now. We were talking about less dogma and direct experience in learning. And there's something to me about learning, which is much less binary. And so you're talking about being able to hold like strengths and weaknesses or, curses and blessings, and not just to sort of settle and harden into a space of not learning where I've made my decision about you or it or them, right? Or me, even myself.
Totally. And, it reminds me of also that balance of progress and tradition, right? And so that's really what we're seeing, wanting to stay the same in the same systems and the same traditions, and then wanting progress and people valuing those two things very differently. We got in a conversation last week when I wrote a Substack around this, and I loved your frame on that, where it's important to be looking at traditions when it comes to eldership, when it comes to ritual, when it comes to storytelling, and what are these stories that we're passing down, speaking of ancestral work, right? And then it's important to look at progress and the way that we're treating one another and the systems that we're creating to build a better world.
Yeah, that's so rich. It's so deep. There's that author, Frank Herbert, everybody knows because of those Dune movies that have come out recently, but he talked about spice, and it's actually a pretty interesting character. So he talked about kind of wheels within wheels and benefit issue. So there are like layers down in this where even within, we talk about indigeneity quite a bit. And modernity, that's a lot in the psychedelic space we kind of talk about. And, I want to know, like, what is progress within an indigenous culture? Is that there are cultures that have been, and we'll say an indigenous culture, but recognizing that there is great diversity within indigeneity has been my experience, at least a little experience that I've had. I'm not claiming to be an expert there, but, I have a perspective, which is mine, that there is no being, thing, tradition, or person that I might experience that doesn't have the possibility of bringing me blessings. And also for me, I might think something that is not going to fit or be effective for me. So the question really then becomes like, what is our place of critique of traditions, even indigenous traditions, even modernity, whatever tradition. And then how do we retrieve, right? And so from our earlier conversation, one of the areas that I'm really looking at is the difference between authoritarian and authoritative. Yeah. Just as a way of helping guide me around retrieval and critique, right? And so if I feel like this comes back to at least Dogma, if something's coming in sort of dominating me and saying, you have to do it this way, well, why? Well, because that's what the ancestors say, right? Then I'm kind of like, well, okay, I'm just feeling kind of like you're being authoritarian right now. You're just telling me I have to do it because you believe it. Right. Is there a way that you can help me? Through millennia, we've learned, right, that if you mix these things this way and that way, you're going to get really sick and not do well. If you mix things these other ways, you're going to do well. This is a useful thing for you to know. Then that starts to become authoritative for me. Right. And so anyway, that's interesting. What is that difference? And I personally feel that hierarchy in power is useful because there will be elders and ancestors who do know more than I do. And so I want to honor, that's that work of respect that I've had to do. I really want to seek authority, wisdom in wherever that may be, eldership of whatever age. Often it does come with age because there is experience that comes with time. You start to see a little more. My dad said when I was 25, he's like, Bob, it's your job. I was so mad at him for being a surgeon because we had overpopulation on the planet. And it was the fault of Western medical science that we have 7 billion people on this planet, right? And it's ruining the planet. I'm so mad at him for being a doctor. And he was like, Bob, you're 25. It's your job to find the things that you want to criticize. When you're 45 or so, you might have run a few things if you're lucky and privileged and fortunate to have had some power, right? And then you're going to start to learn how much love that we're putting into trying to help you have a space for your voice to be heard so you can bring your critique forward. But can you learn that? Right. So to me, that was sort of an authoritative voice then. Right. And so that was part of that helping me to start to learn respect a little bit. Right. But that doesn't mean that I'm still not really sensitive to being dominated by dogma that's not meeting me. Yeah. So that's part of that non-binary. Can we be together? Can I love you and not also just have to be you?
I was listening to a podcast to Brene Brown, and she was talking about how the new Gen Z generation, they don't buy into the authoritative work culture anymore, when you give them something to do, they're going to ask why. Why am I doing that? Where up until that point, when, even in my generation, I was told to do something and I just did it. Right. And so we're starting to see the generations waking up earlier and questioning things, which then is the bridge to creating new realities and new progress. It's that curiosity piece. And I think that's what you do so well, is just being curious about everything.
Right. Again, this is a rich and layered conversation. And what I pray for is sort of a quiet, calm, I'll say safe, it's a popular word today, but it's important, space, right? Where we can share our ideas in a less dominated environment and maybe learn from each other. Like, I am kind of really praying for that, right? And that's part of what we're trying to create here within Sacred Garden, augmented by our direct experience of maybe for some of us what we might call truth or divine, that really can enrich the conversation deeply, right? But
Bob, I'm wondering though, there's been, I wish I had the poem on me, but it's called A Brave Space, this poem that is often shared within spaces. And I'm wondering, the whole poem is basically around, is there such a thing as a safe space? There's really a brave space.
Thank you so much. And we've had a little bit of this conversation, so I really appreciate you bringing that up. And this is sensitive because there are folks who have really experienced a lot of damage and are still in that space. It may be ongoing, and it often is in today's world. And so
especially in a psychedelic church.
Especially in churches where people are seeking, come often because they're seeking help, right, to a church, spiritual or religious types of help, emotional help. And so that sensitivity, which is associated with safety, is something that I hope we're cultivating within our community. It's something that you hear me talk about, that we grow sensitivity to each other so that we can be responsive to the person there and not unintentionally causing trauma, right? But there is that other side that you're mentioning, which I feel is just as important, equally important, not more, not less, which is capacity, because capacity opens up space for freedom. It opens up space for learning, right? It opens up space for, to be blunt, difference. Often the person who's really struggling with a lot of trauma, and I want to be deeply respectful here, and I understand that's a person who may need a lot of control. It's like, no. I don't want people to even be able to maybe look at me sometimes, or, it's like, I really need a space for safety because I'm hurt right now. And I want to honor that. And that's important that we have that sensitivity. But I'm also personally, out of my background, which is privileged, I want to be really upfront, which I've had two loving parents and not a real fear of economic fear, and to be received respectfully by my community. All of those things are really deep privileges, right? And so I'm interested in going further. I'm interested in deepening our understanding of truth across difference. That's asking for bravery and capacity, because we're going to be in places that we don't understand. They're not going to feel safe because they're different. Right. So for me, that ability to experience discomfort, people call it triggers, right? And to be able to say, okay, I'm experiencing discomfort, but actually there's really no one actively physically harming me right now. They just said something that doesn't make sense to me. It rubs me wrong. That might be an opportunity to grow capacity within this community.
Yeah. It's through my own healing journey and through working with entheogens and doing all of my ancestral healing. It has been so eye-opening that most of us are just walking around as 6-7-year-old kids in adult bodies. So through that more of awakening, I have then been able to catch myself when that child part is get curious, show myself compassion, pause. I think the pause is the power of the pause, is not talked about enough. And then building more capacity with myself. And then also through that process, being able to then see when other people's child parts are activated and having more compassion, because you can see that within yourself as well. But it takes an incredible amount of emotional maturity.
There are two words that I've heard you use a few times. One you've been using throughout, and the other one just came up. Awakening and maturity are two words that I've heard that I really resonate. A lot of people are, we talk about psychedelic renaissance and this and that. I really like the awakening. I like that idea because it also frames what we're seeking, what we're finding. That like we tell the stories of our lives and they impact the way our lives go. right? And so there are different metaphors. One of the metaphors for healing is to like sort of kill who we are so that we can be better, to find when it went wrong, like what went wrong, who did it, who did this to us, why aren't we in heaven right now, right? Mm-hmm. And then I personally believe if we keep pointing at blame, that will go all the way back to the first cell that ate the other cell.
Amen to that.
And that doesn't mean that we don't want to have critique of what's going wrong right now and address those issues, right? But for me, the work of maturing is less about killing the bad thing so that it will go away, but it's rather to awakening to who I truly am.
It's a remembering.
A remembering. But I'm gonna push a little bit on that, because I'm not sure, even like I heard Joe Tafur was speaking, he was like, the plants live in that space of unity. And I love that. And that may be true. I don't know, not being a plant, right? But I love my plants. I want to even move to, it's not like something was ever perfect and we have to fix it again and get back there. I mean, I love the Joni Mitchell song, We Got to Get Back to the Garden. And I live in the garden here at Sacred Garden. I'd love to just go tour the garden with you right now,
Please. If we can, let's do that.
Oh, I was showing you pictures of the flowers from today before it was all, maybe we'll get there. But like it may be that we're actually awakening to who we are as humans in ways that we never have before, even now. You see what I mean? That we're awakening to our indigeneity. We're awakening to our global nature, which is a little bit, we're indigenous to Earth, but we've always thought of indigenous as I came from that little valley down there somewhere, right? But like, what are we awakening to as humans?
Well, I think for me, there's two. There's a remembering of the soul and the heart and the divinity that has always been inside you from the very beginning. And then there's the transformation and the evolution, because for me, I think that they're both. There's a remembering and then there's an awakening.
I love that. Maybe we're just having words, right? And in some ways it may be like this. I'm just telling stories. When I was a little baby, I was at one with everything. I didn't even know the difference. I just knew when that thing wasn't around for a while, I'd get hungry and peckish, and then something would be there and I'd feel better. But then I started to grow up and I started to separate and distinguish myself from mom and everything, right? Mm-hmm. And become a separate person. And boy, I felt that separation. I felt lonely. I felt a wound, like separated from God, right? And so it's like there's a plant which is at one with everything. Let's just imagine, right? And then there's maybe some indigenous cultures where people are still feeling that unity, kind of maybe kind of living in there. They're putting names on things too. So my sense is there's some separation because there's a word that describes a thing. So it's probably a little bit out there for that indigenous person, right? But still there may be this, and then we become Western modern, although that also happened, that civilization happened in China and it happened in the Middle East. It's not only the West that modernized, but we really got separate, right? Mm-hmm. And so we forgot.
Yeah, we did forget.
Right. But at the same time, we're awakening to our existence of non-binary. I'm a human on this planet. I have so much power. I can really, we can ruin home if we want. We can also help it become beautiful. We can be friends. We can live in a wild garden earth that would be so beautiful. We're awakening into our power as humans, which is incredibly powerful. We can try to ignore that if we want. We can deny it. We can be ashamed of it, but it's just true.
So with great power comes great responsibility. And
Yep.
So can you talk a little bit about that in terms of where we're at right now in movement building?
So I think power without remembrance is probably going to be domination.
Ooh, that is the quote of the whole podcast right there. Ooh, love it, love it, love it.
If I forget that I owe mom and dad my life, and I just think I'm going to do whatever I want and be I can get away with it, but it's not loving, right? And I think that's kind of what's happened a little bit with humans in civilization and modernity. We've got that power of objectification. We've learned how to see things separate from us and do things to them very, very powerfully. I'm not ashamed of that. I think that's power of a form, but we forgot that we are also it.
I want to take a moment to invite you into something special called alchemy, a 3-month one-on-one coaching journey for people who feel called to step into deeper servant leadership. In Alchemy, we weave together the insights of the Enneagram with the sacred container of plant medicine ceremonies so you can understand your patterns, release what no longer serves you, and rise as the leader that you're meant to be. If you've been feeling the pull to step into your gifts and serve from a place of clarity and integrity, I'd love to walk with you. You can learn more and apply at globalmovementmaker.com/alchemy. This is a gorgeous pivot into talking about your love and relationship with nature, because we've just really been in this egotistical mindset, but really we have to get back to ecology and being able to see that we are nature and that we are interconnected. Bob has probably the most knowledge of nature and wisdom that I've ever met.
I'm tempted to unplug the computer and actually kind of go out into the garden.
Let's go. Let's do it. Let's take a walk.
I want to say thank you to the beautiful garden. Thank you to nature for just growing so well. I'm in Oakland, California, and this garden is the way I hope Sacred Garden Community Church is and will be, which is from all over the world, right? And there's a lot of delicacy around the discussion, but here are beautiful plants.
Just gorgeous.
These are all lovely, mostly Wachuma. I actually had a number of really, to me, very healthy conversations with the National Council of Native American Church Leadership. And they said, hey, can you just leave peyote kind of out of the Western work that you're doing? And I really appreciated the way they asked. They were very gentle and generous. They weren't, being dominating, but they said, yeah, it's a family member that's kind of struggling right now. Peyote is. I don't work with peyote here. I work with plants that are not claimed by unitary traditions, by single traditions. And this is all about really loving and honoring them. Look at these beautiful babies.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Grow well, grow well, grow well, grow well. This is tobacco. This is, I think it's called Argentinian, beautiful tobacco. Morning
beautiful.
Glories, Brugmansia. Oh, there's Artemisia right there.
Your vision, Bob, is to help people grow their own sacred gardens all over the world, right?
I'm so happy. I think next Sunday we're going to have Kaylee's going to be talking, and I'm sure she's okay with me mentioning her first name. She's just one of our members. Didn't really have a garden when she started, and she was showing me pictures just like I am. Mm-hmm. And she has just a beautiful garden, lovely tobacco and morning glories and datura. And for me, the relationship to the plant, people talk about reciprocity and right relationship. Plants are really great teachers that way. Mm-hmm. So if you can have a good relationship with a plant, you can tell because he or she will be thriving. Mm-hmm. Plants are often non-binary. They'll be thriving. And my friend Strider, who grows plants, he's like, you can tell when you have a good relationship with plants. It's like when you walk in the room, they're kind of like, hey.
I love that.
So I think to establish a healthy relationship to a plant is one way of learning to have healthy relationship, because you have to listen to them. You have to respond to them in their needs. There's that do unto others as I would be done unto. But there's another, which I think is a prior golden rule, which is do unto others as they would be done unto.
I haven't heard that before, but it's good. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And plants will kind of teach that, right? Mm-hmm. I have to teach the plant the plant has to teach me what it needs.
Right. Yeah, it's such a beautiful reminder that as humans, we have to tell one another how we want to be loved well. The art of listening and the art of taking care and voicing your needs in the way that you want to be loved. Yeah. Amazing. Well, Bob, we are running out of time, which I'm bummed about because I feel like I could speak with you for ages. Thank you so much for joining me on the Call to Rise podcast. I would love to have you on again. And I'd love for you to share with people how to get involved with Sacred Garden Community Church.
Oh, yeah. I want to say thank you so much. This has been really lovely. I'm kind of feeling like you. I just feel like if it was a dinner party, we just got our first appetizer, sort of.
Agreed. So we're going to have to go for the amuse-bouche and then the main course and then desserts, I think.
I've always wondered what amuse-bouche meant, but we'll figure that out.
We'll talk about that next time.
This has been a real pleasure. If folks want to learn more about Sacred Garden Community, it's easy. Sacred Garden, one word, sacredgarden.life, L-I-F-E, online. And there's a place where you can put in your email, and then you'll get, I think, about 2 emails a week. If you share your email with us, you'll hear about Sunday services people tend to really love. We get good attendance, we have a plant time every Sunday. And so this past Sunday, we were talking about mushrooms all around the world. And we were looking at mycelia from the psilocybe cyanescens and Alenii that grow wild all over here in Oakland. Look at that. It's just holding it together.
Wow. Amazing.
Mycelia.
Beautiful.
So we have a plant time every Sunday where we really learn about sacred plants from all over the world. It turns out that they do grow up out of the ground all over the world. So we like to just love them and honor them. So sacredgarden.life, check out, put in your email, come get to know us. We share least dogma. We commit to bringing care, respect, and approach towards growing trust within this community. Would really hope to be there. Mackenzie, it's always a pleasure meeting you and chatting with you. Yeah,
always a pleasure. Thank you so much, Bob. Till next time. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in.
All right. Bye.
Thank you for listening to The Call to Rise. If today's conversation stirred something in you, subscribe and share it with a fellow movement maker. And join our community at globalmovementmaker.com. Till next time, keep leading with courage, keep weaving ancient wisdom with modern strategy, and always remember to answer the call.